Hi, everyone, and welcome. We are very excited to sit down with Doug Drysdale today, CEO of Cybin. We're going to get an update on all things going on with Cybin, which there's been a lot of good stuff, and then kind of get a general outlook around the psychedelics investment space as well. So, Doug, thanks so much for joining us again. Really appreciate it. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Mackenzie. Good to see you again, and thanks for having me on.
Of course. All right. Well, then again, as I mentioned, it's been a very busy, exciting month for Cybin. Before we dig in, can we just sort of, I know there are new people to the space all the time. Can you give us a kind of reminder, high level refresher on Cybin?
Sure. So we're a clinical stage biotech company developing modified versions of classical psychedelics. So we've taken psilocybin and we've taken DMT and we've modified those molecules in order to enhance the pharmacokinetics or enhance the way that these molecules get to the brain or the site of action. And we're seeing increased potency as a result of that and some really impressive efficacy results in both depression. And we've also had some anxiety data as well. So quite exciting time for the company.
It's fantastic. And we've seen sort of a renewed interest, I think, on psychedelics from an investing front on our side of things. So again, extra really appreciate you taking the time because I know there are a lot of people out there that really want to learn more about what's going on kind of behind the scenes and kind of get a better sense of the space in general. So appreciate it again. Maybe it's a good time to talk through kind of some of the news that you guys have put out lately. I know the most, I think, exciting thing lately has been your getting your designation, your breakthrough therapy designation from the FDA for CYB3. Can you talk us through a little bit about what that means and why it matters?
So yeah, breakthrough therapy designation is quite a rare thing. It's the FDA's highest priority review. So that gives us access to a number of tools, such as fast track approval, priority review, accelerated approval potentially as well, and also the ability to submit data on a rolling basis. So we're not having to wait until everything is complete. We can submit data along the way, and also have a more collaborative relationship with FDA so that we're touching base with them throughout the process rather than just at the end when you submit the data. And in general, treatments that go through breakthrough therapy process end up getting approved in general more quickly than others. The breakthrough therapy, though, was really driven by the amazing data. We announced some top-line phase 2 data in depression at the end of last year. But what I think is really remarkable is that we're now seeing 75% of patients in remission 4 months later. So 2 doses of CYB3, and then 4 months later, 75% of patients are still in remission. I mean, that's remarkable when you compare it to today's standard of care, where only about 1/3 of patients remit. So this is a big leap forward in treating depression.
Yep, a total change. And I think, again, fantastic results to bolster that. What was it like sort of trying to communicate that? Because I know you went to DC, had that meeting with the FDA to kind of, show what you guys were doing. What was the response? Did they have a sense of sort of what psychedelic medicine can do? What was sort of the experience there?
Yeah, so what's remarkable, I think, is that we had over 20 people from FDA show up for the meeting, which is quite unusual, and across all departments. So there seems to be an awful lot of interest at the agency, and it looks to me like each department's trying to learn about these molecules. It's we're learning more all the time as more studies are completed. I think we're one of the discussions was interesting, and that's entering into kind of a new challenge with these treatments is that if you dose somebody with CYB3 and they're in remission, and you follow them up and they're in remission 6 months later or 8 months later, what does that mean? Does that mean that we have to establish a dosing schedule that's 6 or 8 months, or is that next episode of depression just another acute episode of depression? And so it's shifting the kind of the mindset at FDA away from potentially these being just intermittent treatments, but maybe they're acute treatments. And that has all kinds of implications for speeding up approval as well. But yeah, interesting discussions, very collaborative, and just great to see the level of interest from FDA.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I do think just from a patient perspective, I imagine having those, only needing a few doses that really has that longer term effect really helps with the accessibility of it. I know there's increasing interest in facilities or kind of areas where you can get the treatments, but if you have them more frequently, I don't think that there's currently enough of those centers to meet demand or where demand might be soon. So I feel like, again, it's important to have those fewer doses that has that longer effect, just because I think the clinics seem to be sort of a not limiting factor, but um, the growth is still not quite there. Which is interesting.
Yeah, so what we found actually is that two doses seems to be a lot more effective than just a single dose. So with one dose, we see about 20% remission, but with two doses, we see 75% remission, and for 4 months. So the two-dose regimen, I know it's twice as many visits, but we should be able to keep patients out of the system, out of the clinics for long periods of time, which will free up clinic capacity. I think one thing that's really changed with investors' sentiment in the sector now is they're seeing the success of Spravato, from J&J, and about 3,500 centers now that are trained and equipped to provide Spravato. And that's a much more intense dosing regimen. It's 8 visits to the clinic in the first 4 weeks. So obviously what we would be providing would be something a lot more convenient than that. But investors are now seeing that Spravato is growing fast. I think it's J&J's fastest growing product. And they see now that there's a pathway, mechanism for both delivery of care of psychedelics and reimbursement following the Spravato model. So I think that's the penny has finally dropped, I think, with investors. And as seen recently, we've seen a number of raises in the space, including our $150 million private placement.
Yeah, I'd love to get into that a little bit more, just because, great to have that extra capital to be able to kind of continue on and continue the work that you guys are doing. Can you talk a little bit about, I know it's an oversubscribed private placement, what that means, why that's important, why that's different from just a simple capital raise? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So look, $150 million is a big amount for us. It's obviously we're very, very happy with the amount of interest. We were significantly more oversubscribed than that. And so there's a lot of demand this time around. I think it just shows that investors are really getting excited about the potential for these treatments. This will fund our phase 3 program. That's the priority here. We'll also be funding our phase 2 generalized anxiety disorder study out of these proceeds. But as important as the quantum of capital is here, what's I think as rewarding or as gratifying is the names of the investors that are in this round. So Deep Track Capital, RA Capital, Avidity Partners, to name a few, and just really humbled by the level of interest and their commitment and support for us.
Yep. I think with that really, really strong demand, which again makes sense given the results that we're showing and that you guys are posting up, how do you make the decision around, when there's time to, when the time is to get more capital? How does that sort of come along in terms of when you're making those decisions down the road, if there is that such demand?
Yeah, and so it's really about getting to next milestones, and obviously, if you start a phase 3 study, you want to be able to finish it, and so making sure there's sufficient capital to go through the whole of that phase 3 program. So the first phase 3 study will begin around mid-year this year. It'll take 18 to 24 months, 220 patients in that first study. So that great to be able to start that with confidence, knowing that we can see it all the way through to the end.
Yep, that's fantastic. And then you guys are, CYB3, I think, is furthest along in terms of the review process. Again, bolstered definitely by the breakthrough therapy designation. What are some other, compounds that you guys are working on, novel IP?
So CYB4 is our deuterated version of DMT. So we're quite excited about this one. It's about a 90-minute experience, so very scalable. We think with DMT that it may only be one dose that's needed, not two. It's a little different. It's a lot more of an immersive, intense experience. We will test 2 doses so we can see the difference between 1 and 2. But it'll be interesting to see, all the effects of a single dose. So we've initiated already a study in generalized anxiety disorder, a phase 2 study, and that will read out around year end. So towards the end of this year, we'll have another phase 2 readout like it just had for CYB3. And I think was a really interesting indication. We see GAD, or generalized anxiety disorder, as a gateway to all anxiety disorders. And collectively, when you add those together, they affect 18 to 19% of the population. So there's a very large population in need. And I think the treatment options are even fewer for anxiety disorders than they are with depression. So exciting to see that program kicking off.
Yep. Again, great to address those issues. I think you're right. A ton of people in the US and abroad definitely facing anxiety, depression, all of those afflictions. So important to be able to address them. With CYB4, would you be able to take a similar course that you did with CYB3 with sort of that breakthrough designation, or is there anything different? How would you differentiate those in terms of how they're moving through the review process?
Well, I mean, if we see results like we've seen for CYB3, then we have every reason to believe that CYB4 could also potentially qualify for breakthrough therapy designation. Of course, that's up to FDA. But of course, GAD has already received a breakthrough therapy designation with LSD. So we know that the indication qualifies. We know that the current treatments are pretty inadequate. So we should be able to show superior efficacy. And as long as the side effect profile is, as we've seen previously, pretty benign, then it should meet all of those criteria. But right now we're just focused on getting the study up and running. Good news is that the study is running at the same centers that we ran our phase 2 for CYB3. So those are all primed and ready to go and trained. And those centers are really quite excited about trying this much shorter acting treatment.
That's perfect. So I feel like when you first got into the psychedelic space, you must have obviously believed in the power of psychedelics and the ability to, function as a medicine and work well. But actually seeing it kind of come through, are you surprised by how effective and it seems beyond what you would expect or imagine you could get from, a medicine or something like that. Now that you're actually in it and you're seeing these kind of move through and you're seeing the results in the studies, what's your take versus when you first kind of got into the space?
That's an interesting question. So I have to say that when I first started learning about psychedelics and reading a lot of the academic studies that were done at Johns Hopkins, NYU, King's College, etc., my first reaction was kind of, this sounds too good to be true. It just, having worked in drug development for quite a long time, and also had been involved with some depression products as well, just seemed too good to be true. And it was part of what made me really want to get into this space, is that the opportunity to bring something so groundbreaking to patients was really, really exciting. But now, of course, we're seeing results from a few different molecules, all very compelling, all very different, than current treatments. The ability to remove someone's depression so rapidly within a day or so. It's just exciting and remarkable to me. We're also positioning CYB3 as an adjunctive therapy, so patients don't have to spend 6 or 8 weeks titrating off of their background medications. They can be treated right away. So imagine if someone goes to the doctor and within a couple of days they could have treatment, and within a few days they may be free of their depression, instead of waiting weeks and weeks for these current treatments to work. So that's what gets me excited every day about these is that just the speed and the size of the effects.
Yeah, the impact and how quickly, for sure. So am I understanding correctly? So if someone's on SSRIs or something more traditionally used to address depression or something like that, they're able to use something like CYB3 and then wean themselves off of SSRIs? Is that what you're saying ultimately? They don't have to wait that longer period?
Yeah, exactly. So as if it was if you were to treat if you were to use CYB3 as a monotherapy, you'd have to titrate patients off of their background medications, and you have to do that quite carefully with SSRIs and SNRIs, so 6 or 8 weeks or so. But as we have positioned CYB3 as an adjunctive therapy, and we studied patients that were taking SSRIs and SNRIs in our phase 2 study, and we'll do the same in our phase 3 study, then there's no need to wait those 6 or 8 weeks and go through the difficult process. Patients can take CYB3 alongside what they're currently taking. And then we will track in our phase 3 what happens to the background medication. I mean, likely we would expect to see patients coming off of those background medications after treatment.
That would be good. And I wonder if it helps kind of ease that process. I know a lot of people who are kind of weaning themselves off of SSRIs can experience suicidal ideation or sort of negative effects. So I wonder if that will also kind of in conjunction help limit those effects. We'll have to wait and see. That's interesting though. So I'd love to talk just a little bit kind of about how people are viewing psychedelics. I think that there has been a lot of progress made recently in terms of accepting psychedelics, being interested, sort of that renewed interest in psychedelics, what they can do. But I do think to some degree, some stigma still exists around it. What's your view on sort of that lingering hangover from, war on drugs way back in the day. How do you think people are viewing psychedelics kind of more broadly currently?
Things have definitely shifted. I think there's an acceptance now broadly amongst the psychiatric community that these molecules have potential to be approved as treatments. There's been acceptance amongst the investor community about efficacy also for quite a while. As I mentioned, I think the hang up with investors for a while has been, trying to get their head around the commercial model. But I think that's now been solved and resolved as well. At least people can see an analog or a pathway to that. Clearly, as we go through the development process and we start to see FDA approvals, an FDA stamp of safety and efficacy, and these treatments getting reimbursed, I think it's a very different situation than if a patient gets a prescription from their doctor, they're treated in a clinical setting, they're getting reimbursed by their insurance company. It will feel like every other treatment. So there's still some stigma to overcome, but we've come a long way already in just the last few years. And I think continuing through this FDA process is just going to help sort of validate the safety and the efficacy of these treatments with patients.
Yeah, so sort of that normalization to some degree.
Exactly.
Are there any sort of, I guess there's also an education component as well, which I'm sure comes from doctors as well, can come from companies. But are there any demographics that you think, might need a little extra support and education in terms of feeling comfortable turning to this tool and really seeing it work in their life? Is it older generations, younger, or do you think that there's just sort of a mix?
Yeah, I would imagine that the younger generations are a little more accepting of these treatments, more open-minded. I think that folks that grew up in the 70s and heard all about the war on drugs over and over again, and how bad these molecules are, but may need some more convincing. But again, those are also folks that generally trust their doctor and trust the healthcare system to take care of them. So we'll have some education to do, but we've come a long way, in a pretty short period of time, I think.
Yep, I definitely agree. Just out of curiosity, I don't think this necessarily impacts you. I know psilocybin still listed Schedule 1 in the US. I think a lot of the rescheduling has been changing on the cannabis side that we've seen that potentially has been up for debate of whether that should be moved around because it has those medicinal benefits. Do you think we ever see that happen also with psychedelics? Does it matter even? Does it need to? Just kind of curious of your view there.
Yeah, so I think at the moment that policymakers, lawmakers don't really have, at a federal level at least, don't really have any incentive to broadly reschedule psychedelics because there are a number of clinical studies ongoing. They just have to wait, and then those processes will play out and will prove that these treatments are safe and effective, and then automatically then after FDA approval, it will trigger a DEA rescheduling for each of those, and they'll be on a specific treatment basis, molecule by molecule basis, and we'll keep these treatments available through the healthcare system. But I don't see a broad rescheduling, just because there's no incentive for policymakers to make that decision when they can just sort of fly under the cover of FDA and let the system sort of the process play itself out.
Yeah, so it'll eventually kind of shake out as we already have the research coming out. That makes sense. Yeah, but no rush to get it done. That makes sense. So I'd love to turn, I guess, to sort of the investment side a little bit more, focusing in on there. I know it's been a volatile space. We've seen that also in cannabis. I know they're different, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that things can be volatile. I think as long as you understand and know that, do you expect that to kind of continue once those drugs are fully through the review process? I think biotech notoriously has that sort of, not reputation, but it can be volatile, but it's not a bad thing necessarily. What do you expect in terms of post review, I guess?
Yeah, I would say right now where we are is that the top 4 or 5 companies in the space are well capitalized and have tremendous institutional support at this point. And I think we've now got investor acceptance that these treatments are going to make it to market. Obviously, some big bets have been made in recent months. And so I'd expect now as you go forward that these stocks will behave like biotech stocks rather than like psychedelic stocks, which is how they've been behaving for the last couple of years. And okay, there's been a bit of a biotech winter for the last couple of years, but psychedelic stocks were, were really downtrodden, even more than biotech. But now I think things have shifted. I mean, you've got there's four or five companies in later stage trials, well capitalized, great data. So there's no reason they shouldn't behave like biotech stocks and react to milestones and catalysts that come through the development process.
Yep. In terms of like branding in general, are you leaning? I know you are a biotech, company in general, but is it going to be a lean away, do you think, for a lot of these companies, or for you kind of away from the psychedelics? Because it does have, you're right, it does seem more out there, more different, even though it is just a drug and can kind of help treat these conditions that we've already seen. Do you think that there's more of a branding towards, again, like traditional biotech in some way, to kind of attract investors, or does that need to happen at all?
Yeah, I mean, we've always talked about ourselves as a biotech company, as a mental health company. But there's no getting away from the fact that we're developing psychedelic drugs. And that is what's exciting, because if it was like any other depression treatment, you'd be taking these medicines every day and they'd have some moderate effect and take a long time to work. And that's not what's happening here. You're seeing very rapid results and very large effect sizes. And that's because of the psychedelic effects. It's because of the significant neuroplasticity that happens very quickly. So there's no getting away from the fact that these are psychedelic molecules. We're just going to have to, as a healthcare system, adapt to this new paradigm, and it may mean that patients have to spend a bit more time, in a clinical setting, initially for 1 or 2 doses. But then our hope is that they would spend a lot of time out of the system, and not having chronic side effects associated with their medications. So. Yeah, we've seen shifts like this before in oncology, with chemotherapy, and chemotherapy centers and infusion centers need to be set up, and I don't see any reason why that can't continue here. And we're already seeing some of that, obviously, with this Bravado network of about 3,500 centers already.
Yep, that's fantastic. So in general, you see sort of the psychedelics kind of biotech sector rising, kind of going forward. How do you think, as that theme kind of gets more attention, more play, more attention from investors, how do you think you guys separate yourself out kind of within that pack? I think you guys have done a great job already, but how do you continue to kind of break forward in that group?
Yeah, so as we think about phase 3 data set that we're looking to generate, we've been quite thoughtful about the molecule, the dosing protocol, the dosage strength, and adjunctive therapy. So MDD patients are the larger part of the depressed population, rather than TRD or treatment-resistant patients, which are a small subset. 70% of patients with depression are taking some underlying background antidepressant already. So clearly, positioning as an adjunctive treatment makes the most sense. 1 dose may be very convenient, but 2 doses seems to go from 20% to 75% remission. It's a huge difference. It really seems to lock in the benefits, and for months at a time. And we've done, with our adjustments and modifications to the molecule, we've improved brain penetration and potency. So the goal from the outset was to try to optimize that data set, and it's already playing out in the data we've seen so far. And we're confident we're going to have a successful phase 3 program. Yeah.
So those strong results and strong IP, definitely a huge differentiator. Definitely agree there. Finally, to wrap things up a little bit, for investors who are curious, interested in this theme, interested in Cybin, where would you recommend they go to find more information? I guess, where would they go?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously you can go to the website, cybin.com. You'll see an investor presentation there that outlines the programs that we're working on and the data. And there's a way to contact us through the website if you have any questions.
Yep, that's fantastic. All right, again, Doug, thanks so much for taking the time, especially ahead of a long weekend. Really appreciate it. I know you guys have been very busy, so I hope you get some time to relax and enjoy the weekend. Everyone, thanks for joining. Really, really appreciate it. And we will catch you next week. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you then. Bye.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at advisorshares.com.